The year 987 AD marked a pivotal moment in the history of France, as Hugh Capet, a man of considerable influence but not of royal blood, seized the crown, thereby establishing a new dynasty that would shape the destiny of the nation for centuries to come. Imagine the twilight of the 10th century, a time when the echoes of Charlemagne's vast empire had long faded, leaving behind a mosaic of independent duchies and counties, each ruled by powerful lords who often paid only nominal homage to a king, whose authority barely extended beyond his own demesne. The land, then known as West Francia, was a patchwork quilt of allegiances, its people living under the shadow of local strongmen rather than a distant monarch. The Carolingian dynasty, which had once shone so brightly, was flickering out, its last kings weak and ineffectual, their power eroded by internal strife and the relentless incursions of Norsemen. The stage was set for a change, a transformation born not of grand conquest, but of shrewd political maneuvering and the sheer exhaustion of a fragmented realm. Hugh Capet, born around 938 AD, was not a figure of towering legend in his youth. He was the son of Hugh the Great, Duke of the Franks, a man who had been the most powerful noble in West Francia, even holding the title of Duke of the Franks, which essentially made him the commander-in-chief of the kingdom's military forces. Hugh the Great had, in fact, been offered the crown himself on several occasions, but he had wisely declined, perhaps understanding the precarious nature of the kingship at that time. Instead, he preferred to be the power behind the throne, influencing events without bearing the full burden of royal responsibility. This legacy of pragmatic power, rather than ostentatious display, was deeply ingrained in young Hugh. Hugh Capet inherited his father's vast territorial holdings, which stretched from the Loire to the Seine, encompassing the strategically vital cities of Paris and Orléans. These lands, often referred to as the Duchy of Francia, formed the heartland of what would eventually become modern France. More importantly, he inherited his father's political acumen and a network of alliances that crisscrossed the kingdom. He was a man of his time, a warrior noble, but also a cunning diplomat, capable of forging agreements and understanding the delicate balance of power that governed the fractured realm. His rise was not a sudden usurpation, but a gradual accumulation of influence, a slow tightening of the reins of power as the Carolingian line weakened. The last Carolingian king, Louis V, died without an heir in 987 AD, under circumstances that remain somewhat mysterious. Some accounts suggest a hunting accident, others whisper of poisoning, but the exact truth is lost to the mists of time. What is certain is that his death plunged the kingdom into a succession crisis. The most obvious Carolingian claimant was Charles, Duke of Lower Lorraine, Louis V's uncle. However, Charles was viewed with suspicion by many of the powerful nobles. He was perceived as too closely aligned with the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, and his lands lay largely outside the traditional heartland of West Francia. The French nobility, fiercely protective of their independence and wary of any foreign influence, saw Charles as a potentially disruptive force. This was Hugh Capet's moment. He had cultivated strong relationships with the church, particularly with Adalbero, Archbishop of Reims, a highly influential figure who championed Hugh's cause. Adalbero, a shrewd political operator himself, understood that a strong, stable ruler was necessary to bring order to the kingdom. He argued eloquently that the crown should be given to the man most capable of defending the realm and ensuring its peace, rather than simply following a shaky line of hereditary succession. This argument, delivered at an assembly of nobles and bishops in Senlis, proved decisive. On July 3, 987 AD, Hugh Capet. It was elected king by the assembled magnates and consecrated at Noyon. The ceremony, though modest by later standards, was profoundly significant. It marked not just a change of dynasty, but a subtle shift in the very nature of kingship in France. While the election was a testament to the power of the nobility, Hugh's subsequent actions would gradually reassert the monarch's authority. He was not a king by divine right in the later absolute sense, but a king chosen by his peers, a primus inter pares, or first among equals. Yet, this election, rather than weakening the monarchy, paradoxically laid the groundwork for its future strength. The immediate challenge for Hugh was to consolidate his power and ensure the succession of his own line. He understood that his election, while legitimate, was still vulnerable. To preempt any challenges and to establish a clear hereditary principle, he swiftly took a bold and unprecedented step. Just a few months after his own coronation, he had his eldest son, Robert, crowned co-king. This practice, known as associating the eldest son with the throne, became a hallmark of the early Capetian dynasty. It ensured a smooth transition of power upon the reigning monarch's death, preventing the kind of succession crises that had plagued the Carolingians. This was a masterstroke of political foresight, effectively bypassing the elective principle that had brought him to power and laying the foundation for a truly hereditary monarchy. Hugh Capet's reign, which lasted until 996 AD, was not marked by grand military campaigns or dramatic territorial expansion. Instead, it was a period of patient consolidation and careful diplomacy. He faced immediate opposition from Charles of Lorraine, who, predictably, refused to accept Hugh's legitimacy. Charles briefly captured Laon and Reims, but his rebellion was ultimately unsuccessful. Hugh, with the support of his allies, eventually captured Charles through a betrayal and imprisoned him, where he died shortly thereafter. This victory, though small in scale, was crucial. It eliminated the last viable Carolingian claimant and solidified Hugh's position. One of the lesser-known but fascinating aspects of Hugh Capet's reign is the origin of his surname, Capet. While its precise etymology is debated, the most widely accepted theory is that it derives from the Latin word cappa, meaning cloak or cape. It is believed that Hugh, or perhaps one of his ancestors, was known for wearing a distinctive cape, possibly a monastic cloak, which earned him the nickname. This humble origin stands in stark contrast to the grandeur that the Capetian name would later acquire. It speaks to a time when noble titles and surnames were often more descriptive than formal, reflecting a personal characteristic or a specific role. The early Capetian kings, including Hugh, faced a unique challenge. Their royal domain, the lands they directly controlled, was relatively small compared to the vast territories held by powerful vassals like the Dukes of Normandy, Aquitaine, and Burgundy. The King of France, in these early centuries, was often less powerful than some of his own subjects. This disparity in power led to a long and arduous struggle, spanning generations, to assert royal authority over the independent-minded nobility. The Capetians were essentially kings of a theoretical realm, their actual power limited to a narrow strip of land around Paris and Orléans. Historians still debate the extent to which Hugh Capet consciously envisioned the long-term impact of his actions. Was he merely a pragmatic noble seizing an opportunity, or did he possess a grander vision for a unified France? While it's impossible to know his exact thoughts, His consistent efforts to secure the succession and to cultivate alliances suggest a clear understanding of the need for stability and continuity. He laid the foundation, not through force of arms, but through a quiet, persistent assertion of royal power. Prerogative and the shrewd management of political relationships. The legacy of Hugh Capet is not one of a charismatic conqueror, but of a steady, methodical builder. He established a dynasty that, through a remarkable stroke of luck and strategic planning, managed to produce a direct male heir for over 300 years, a phenomenon known as the Capetian miracle. This unbroken line of succession provided an unparalleled degree of stability and continuity, allowing the Capetian kings to gradually expand their power and consolidate their control over the fragmented kingdom. Each successive king built upon the foundations laid by his predecessor, slowly but surely transforming the theoretical kingship into a tangible reality. The early Capetians understood the importance of symbolic power. They maintained the traditions of coronation and anointing, which imbued their rule with a sacred quality, elevating them above mere feudal lords. They also cultivated the image of the king as a protector of the church and a dispenser of justice, roles that resonated deeply with the populace and provided a moral basis for their authority. Though their actual power was limited, their moral and spiritual authority was significant, giving them a unique leverage in their dealings with the powerful nobility. Imagine the dusty roads of 10th century France, the fortified castles dotting the landscape, each a testament to local power. The idea of a unified nation, governed by a single strong monarch, must have seemed a distant dream, almost a fantasy. Yet it was in this fragmented, turbulent world that Hugh Capet, a man of quiet determination, planted the seed of a new beginning. His reign, though often overshadowed by the more dramatic exploits of later kings, was arguably one of the most crucial in French history. He took a crumbling kingdom, a mere geographical expression, and breathed new life into the concept of French monarchy. The Capetian dynasty, born from this moment, would go on to preside over the slow, arduous process of nation-building. They would face countless challenges: rebellious vassals, foreign invasions, religious conflicts, and economic upheavals. Yet, the initial stability provided by Hugh Capet's foresight and the unbroken line of succession he established gave them the resilience to endure and, eventually, to triumph. The Capetian miracle of continuous male heirs, a statistical anomaly that defied the odds of medieval mortality, allowed for a consistent royal policy and a gradual strengthening of the crown. The story of the Capetians is, in many ways, the story of France itself, a journey from fragmentation to unity. From a collection of feudal territories to a powerful, centralized state. It began with a single, decisive act in 987 AD, when Hugh Capet, the Duke of the Franks, stepped forward to claim a crown that many believed was more burden than blessing. His reign, though short, was a masterclass in political pragmatism, laying the groundwork for a dynasty that would endure for over 3 centuries and profoundly shape the identity of a nation. The echoes of that distant coronation, the whispers of ambition and opportunity, still resonate through the annals of time, reminding us how a single moment can alter the course of history. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and leave in the comments the time and place you're listening from. The whisper of the wind through the newly planted orchards of the Ile-de-France seemed to carry the weight of a kingdom in its nascent stages. Robert II, who would come to be known as Robert the Pious, inherited a crown still fragile, a realm more a collection of disparate loyalties than a unified state. His father, Hugh Capet, had laid the foundation, but it was Robert who began the arduous work of building upon it, brick by painstaking brick. His reign, spanning from 996 to 1031, was a tapestry woven with threads of religious devotion, political maneuvering, and occasional, though reluctant, warfare. Robert's piety was not merely a convenient moniker, it was a defining characteristic of his rule. He was a learned man for his time, a scholar who composed hymns and engaged in theological debates. This devotion, however, did not translate into a peaceful reign. The very act of consolidating power in a fragmented feudal landscape was inherently fraught with conflict. His early years were marked by a series of excommunications from the church, primarily due to his complicated marital life. He first married Rosala of Lombardy, a union arranged for political gain, but he soon repudiated her. His second marriage to Bertha of Burgundy, his cousin, was deemed incestuous by the Pope, leading to a period of intense pressure and, ultimately, another annulment. These personal struggles, played out on a public stage, underscored the immense influence the church wielded over secular rulers, even those as devout as Robert. It was a constant dance between spiritual authority and temporal power, a delicate balance that future Capetians would also have to master. Beyond his personal life, Robert faced the more tangible challenge of asserting royal authority over powerful, often rebellious, vassals. The great lords of Normandy, Anjou, Blois, and Flanders held sway over vast territories, often acting as independent rulers, their loyalty to the king more a matter of convenience than an inherent obligation. Robert's strategy was often one of patient negotiation, strategic alliances, and the careful deployment of his limited military resources. He understood that direct confrontation with too many powerful magnates simultaneously could shatter the fragile Capetian dream. Instead, he focused on expanding the royal domain, the lands directly controlled by the king, through a combination of inheritance, forfeiture, and shrewd land acquisitions. This slow, deliberate expansion was crucial. Each new castle, each new village, brought under direct royal administration, added a small but significant increment to the crown's power base. One of Robert's more notable military engagements was his campaign against the Duchy of Burgundy. When Duke Henry I of Burgundy, Robert's uncle, died childless in 1002, Robert asserted his claim to the duchy. This sparked a prolonged conflict with Otto William, a powerful count who also laid claim to the territory. The struggle for Burgundy lasted for over a decade, a testament to the tenacity of feudal lords and the difficulty of enforcing royal succession outside the immediate Capetian heartland. Robert eventually secured the duchy for his son, Henry, but not without considerable effort and expense. This victory, however, was significant. It demonstrated the Capetian king's willingness and ability to project power beyond the Ile-de-France, even if the process was slow and arduous. Robert the Pious also played a significant role in the intellectual and religious life of his era. He was a patron of learning, supporting monastic reforms and encouraging the establishment of schools. His court became a center of scholarship, attracting intellectuals from across Europe. This cultural patronage, though less immediately visible than military campaigns, contributed to the prestige of the Capetian monarchy. It presented the king not just as a warrior or a politician, but as a guardian of Christian civilization, a role that resonated deeply with the populace. Historians still debate the extent to which Robert's piety was a genuine spiritual conviction versus a calculated political strategy to gain the support of the church. Perhaps it was a blend of both, as is often the case with rulers who navigate the complex interplay of faith and power. When Robert the Pious died in 1031, he left behind a kingdom that was still far from unified, but undeniably stronger than the one he had inherited. The royal domain had grown, the Capetian succession was more firmly established, and the prestige of the monarchy had been enhanced. He had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of early medieval European politics, laying a more solid groundwork for his successors. His son, Henry I, ascended to the throne in a kingdom still simmering with internal strife. His reign, from 1031 to 1060, would be characterized by a constant struggle to maintain and expand the fragile authority his father had painstakingly built. Henry, unlike his scholarly father, was more of a pragmatic warrior king, forced by circumstance to spend much of his reign on horseback, leading armies against rebellious vassals or defending his borders. One of Henry's immediate challenges was a rebellion led by his own mother, Constance of Arles, and his younger brother, Robert. Constance, favouring her younger son, sought to place him on the throne, sparking a bitter civil war. This internal family conflict, a recurring theme in medieval monarchies, highlighted the precarious nature of royal succession and the constant need for the king to assert his dominance, even over his closest kin. Henry eventually prevailed, but not without making significant concessions, including granting the Duchy of Burgundy to his brother Robert, effectively detaching it from the royal domain. This decision, though politically expedient at the time, would have long-term consequences, creating a powerful cadet branch of the Capetian family that would often act independently of the crown. Henry I's reign also coincided with the rise of powerful regional principalities, particularly the Duchy of Normandy under William the Conqueror. The Capetian kings, while theoretically supreme, often found themselves in a delicate balance of power with these formidable dukes and counts. Henry's relationship with William was complex, marked by periods of alliance and conflict. At times, Henry supported William against his own rebellious vassals, recognizing the strategic advantage of a strong allied Normandy. At other times, he viewed William's growing power with suspicion, fearing a challenge to his own authority. For instance, in 1054, Henry I launched a major campaign against William of Normandy, leading a large army into the duchy. The ensuing Battle of Mortimer was a decisive defeat for the Capetian forces, a stark reminder of the limitations of royal power against a well-organized and formidable vassal. This defeat underscored the ongoing struggle for dominance between the king and his most powerful subjects. The Capetian kings of this era, including Henry I, often found themselves in a paradoxical position. While they were the theoretical overlords of France, their actual power was often less than that of their most powerful vassals. Their royal domain was relatively small, primarily concentrated around Paris and Orléans. Their authority outside this core territory was often dependent on the personal relationships they cultivated with their vassals, the effectiveness of their military, and the support of the church. This decentralized power structure is a key characteristic of early feudal France, and the Capetians spent centuries slowly and painstakingly reversing it. A lesser-known detail about Henry I's reign is his deep interest in falconry, a popular aristocratic pastime. He was known to possess a magnificent collection of falcons and hawks, and hunting expeditions were not merely recreational, but also served as important social and political events, allowing the king to interact with his vassals in a more informal setting, forging bonds and gathering intelligence. These seemingly minor details offer a glimpse into the daily life and cultural practices of the era, illustrating how even leisure activities were intertwined with the serious business of governance. Henry I also continued the Capetian tradition of associating his heir with the throne during his own lifetime, a practice known as co-regency. He had his son Philip I crowned king in 1059, a year before his own death. This practice, initiated by Hugh Capet, was a crucial innovation that helped to ensure the smooth and undisputed succession of the Capetian dynasty for generations, avoiding the often destructive power struggles that plagued other European monarchies. It was a subtle but profoundly effective strategy for dynastic stability. The challenges faced by Robert II and Henry I were not merely about expanding territory. They were about defining the very nature of kingship in a fragmented world. They had to navigate the intricate web of feudal loyalties, balance the demands of the church, and contend with the ambitions of powerful nobles. Their reigns were less about grand conquests and more about the slow, incremental work of building institutions, asserting legal authority, and establishing a sense of royal legitimacy. They were laying the foundations for a more centralized state, even if the vision of such a state was still centuries away. The Capetian monarchy, during these early years, was like a sapling pushing through rocky soil. It was vulnerable, buffeted by winds of rebellion and external pressures, but it possessed an inherent resilience. The kings, though sometimes weak in military terms compared to their vassals, held a unique symbolic power. They were anointed by God, the direct successors of Charlemagne in the eyes of many. And this spiritual legitimacy was a potent force. This divine right, combined with the strategic practice of co-regency, allowed the Capetian line to endure and eventually flourish. The landscape of France during this period was a patchwork of duchies, counties, and lordships, each with its own customs, laws, and often its own ambitions. The king's writ often ran only as far as his sword could reach, or his diplomacy could persuade. Yet amidst this decentralization, the Capetian kings, through their persistence, their strategic marriages, and their occasional military victories, began to weave a thread of royal authority that, however thin at first, would eventually bind the disparate parts of France into a cohesive whole. The legacy of Robert the Pious and Henry I is not one of dramatic territorial expansion or revolutionary political change. Instead, it is a testament to the power of patient, persistent state-building in an era of profound instability. They held the Capetian torch aloft during a challenging period, ensuring that the flame of royal authority, however flickering, continued to burn. Their reigns were a crucial bridge between the nascent Capetian dynasty and the more powerful monarchy that would emerge in later centuries. They were the quiet architects of a kingdom yet to be fully realized, their efforts often overshadowed by the more flamboyant exploits of their successors, but no less vital to the unfolding tapestry of French history. The whispers of their struggles and triumphs still echo in the ancient stones of the Ile-de-France, a reminder of the slow, arduous birth of a nation. The sun, which had once seemed to set on the Capetian dream, now began to cast longer, more defined shadows across the nascent kingdom. The year was 1060, and a new king, Philip I, ascended the throne, a mere child of 7. His regency, initially guided by his mother, Anne of Kiev, and his uncle, Baldwin VI of Flanders, was a period of delicate balance, where the crown's authority remained a fragile bloom in a garden of powerful thorns. The great lords, ever watchful, saw in Philip's youth an opportunity to further their own ambitions, and the early years of his reign were marked by a constant struggle to assert even nominal control over the sprawling, semi-independent duchies and counties that comprised France. Yet, even amidst this internal strife, a new current was beginning to stir across Europe, one that would profoundly shape the destiny of the Capetians and the very identity of France. The Crusades. The call for holy war, first sounded by Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in 1095, resonated deeply within a society steeped in religious fervour and a martial tradition. While Philip I himself, entangled in domestic disputes and excommunicated for an illicit marriage, did not lead a crusade, his reign witnessed the initial waves of French knights and commoners answering the papal summons. This movement, born of a complex tapestry of religious devotion, a desire for land and glory, and perhaps even a convenient outlet for restless noblemen, inadvertently began to consolidate the king's moral authority, if not yet his direct power. The idea of a unified Christian purpose, even if directed outwards, subtly reinforced the notion of a Christian king at the heart of the realm. Philip I's personal life, however, was a source of considerable scandal and weakened his standing with the church. His desire to divorce his first wife, Bertha of Holland, and marry Bertrade of Montfort, already married to the Count of Anjou, led to repeated excommunications. This defiance, while personally costly, also revealed a burgeoning, if nascent, tension between the spiritual authority of the papacy and the temporal power of the French crown. It was a struggle that would echo through centuries, each king grappling with the delicate dance of divine right and earthly prerogative. Despite these personal failings, Philip I's long reign, spanning nearly half a century, provided a crucial period of continuity. The Capetian dynasty, though still weak, had endured. The very fact that the throne passed from father to son for so many generations, unbroken by civil war or foreign invasion, was a testament to a growing, if often unacknowledged, stability. Historians still debate the true extent of Philip I's influence on the long-term trajectory of the Capetian monarchy. Was he merely a placeholder king, weathering the storm, or did his very survival, despite his weaknesses, lay a crucial foundation for his successors? Perhaps his greatest achievement was simply to be king for so long, allowing the idea of a hereditary French monarchy to slowly take root in the collective consciousness. When Philip I died in 1108, his son, Louis VI, known as the Fat, though perhaps more accurately, the Fighter or the Awakener, inherited a kingdom still fragmented, but one ripe for a stronger hand. Louis VI was a stark contrast to his father. Energetic, pragmatic, and deeply pious, he understood that the crown's power could not be built on moral authority alone. It required direct, forceful action. His reign marked a pivotal shift, moving from the passive survival of his predecessors to an active, often brutal, assertion of royal control. Louis VI's primary objective was to subdue the unruly Castellans and minor lords who plagued the Ile-de-France, the royal domain, turning it into a patchwork of independent fortresses that defied royal writs and preyed on merchants and pilgrims. These local tyrants, operating from their fortified keeps, were a constant source of instability, hindering trade and making travel perilous. Louis, with the unwavering support of his trusted advisor, Suger, the abbot of Saint Denis, embarked on a systematic campaign to dismantle their power. His approach was direct: besiege their castles, destroy their fortifications, and if necessary, execute those who resisted. One such stronghold was the notorious Château de Montlhéry, a mere 20 miles south of Paris, whose lords had long been a thorn in the side of the early Capetians. They controlled a vital road, extorting tolls and harassing travellers. Louis VI, with a determination his predecessors had lacked, laid siege to Montlhéry repeatedly, eventually forcing its surrender and placing it under direct royal control. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout his reign, Louis campaigned tirelessly, often personally leading his knights, earning him his more fitting moniker. The fighter, he understood that true power emanated from the ability to enforce one's will, and he was relentless in asserting the king's authority within his own domain. This period of consolidation, often overlooked in favour of the grander narratives of the Crusades, was absolutely fundamental to the future strength of the French monarchy. It was here, in the muddy fields and contested roads of the Ile-de-France, that the Capetian kings began to forge a true kingdom from a collection of feuding fiefdoms. Beyond the immediate concerns of his domain, Louis VI also began to engage with the broader political landscape of Europe. He cultivated a close relationship with the Church, recognizing its immense influence and moral authority. Unlike his excommunicated father, Louis VI was a staunch defender of ecclesiastical rights and a patron of monasteries and cathedrals. This alliance with the Church provided him with a crucial source of legitimacy and a network of educated administrators, helping him to slowly centralize the rudimentary bureaucracy of the kingdom. His reign also saw the first stirrings of a more unified French identity, albeit one still very much in its infancy. The Crusades, though distant, played a role in this. While Louis himself did not go on crusade, he actively encouraged and supported those who did, seeing it as a way to channel the martial energies of his restless nobility and to elevate the prestige of his kingdom. The idea of a French contribution to the Holy Wars, even if the term French was still fluid and evolving, began to foster a sense of shared purpose among the disparate lords and peoples under the Capetian crown. Louis VI also faced a formidable external threat: the growing power of the Anglo-Norman kings. William the Conqueror's invasion of England in 1066 had created a dangerous new entity, a king who was simultaneously sovereign in his own right in England and a vassal of the French crown for his continental possessions in Normandy. This created an inherent tension, a constant source of friction that would define Anglo-French relations for centuries. Louis VI understood this threat acutely and spent much of his reign engaging in a complex dance of diplomacy and intermittent warfare with Henry I of England. Their rivalry, often played out through proxy wars and shifting alliances with border lords, was a constant drain on resources, but also forced Louis to develop more sophisticated strategies for governance and military organization. A lesser-known detail from Louis VI's reign illustrates his pragmatic approach to power. He actively encouraged the development of communes in towns. These urban centers often granted charters of self-governance in exchange for loyalty and financial support, provided the king with an alternative power base to the entrenched feudal nobility. The rise of these communes, particularly in the south, represented a significant shift in the social and economic landscape of France, fostering trade and creating a new class of burghers who looked to the king rather than their local lord for protection and justice. This strategic alliance with the burgeoning urban centres was a shrewd move, slowly chipping away at the decentralised power structure that had so long plagued the Capetians. Louis VI's most significant long-term contribution, however, lay in establishing the principle of royal justice. He began to actively hear appeals from local courts, presenting himself as the ultimate arbiter of justice in the realm. This was a radical departure from previous Capetian practice, where royal justice was largely confined to the royal domain. By extending his judicial reach, Louis began to weave a legal tapestry that, however thin at first, would eventually bind the kingdom together under the king's law. This embryonic legal system, though rudimentary, laid the groundwork for the more sophisticated royal courts that would emerge in later centuries. His final years were marked by a pivotal decision that would forever alter the course of French history: the marriage of his son, Louis VII, to Eleanor of Aquitaine. Aquitaine was a vast and wealthy duchy, stretching from the Loire to the Pyrenees, far larger and richer than the royal domain itself. This marriage, though ultimately ending in divorce and a catastrophic loss for France, initially promised to unite an immense swathe of territory under Capetian control. It was a testament to Louis VI's ambition and his growing vision for a truly powerful French monarchy. He died in 1137, leaving behind a kingdom far more stable and a crown far more respected than the one he had inherited. The seeds of a centralized state had been sown, and the path towards French prominence, though still long and arduous, had been clearly marked. The transition from Philip I to Louis VI represents a crucial turning point in Capetian history. Philip, despite his personal struggles, had ensured the dynasty's survival, proving that the Capetian line could endure through weakness. Louis, on the other hand, demonstrated that the Capetian crown could be an active force, capable of asserting its authority and laying the groundwork for a unified kingdom. His relentless campaigns against unruly lords, his strategic alliance with the church and the communes, and his visionary, if sometimes flawed, diplomatic maneuvers all contributed to a profound shift in the perception and reality of royal power. The gentle, immersive storytelling of earlier reigns now gave way to the clang of steel and the roar of siege engines, as the Capetian kings began to carve out their dominion with a newfound vigour. The whispers of the past were now joined by the determined footsteps of a monarch intent on shaping the future. The sun, a persistent eye in the heavens, had witnessed the dawn of a new Capetian king, Louis VII, in 1137. He was a young man, barely 17, with a gentle spirit and a deep devotion that bordered on the monastic. His father, Louis VI, had been a robust and worldly king, but Louis VII was different, shaped by an early education intended for the church, a path abruptly altered by the sudden death of his elder brother. The crown, heavy with earthly concerns, now rested on a head more inclined to spiritual contemplation. His ascension, however, was not marked by quiet prayer alone. It was entangled with a marriage, a political union of immense consequence, to Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was a woman of dazzling beauty, fierce intelligence, and an independent spirit that sparkled like the jewels she favoured. Eleanor was the heiress to the vast duchy of Aquitaine, a sprawling territory in southwestern France. Larger and richer than the king's own domain around Paris. Her lands stretched from the Loire to the Pyrenees, encompassing fertile plains, bustling ports, and ancient cities. This marriage, brokered by Louis VI just before his death, was meant to be a triumph, uniting the heart of France with its vibrant south, consolidating Capetian power in an unprecedented way. Their wedding took place in Bordeaux, a city already humming with the promise of prosperity. Louis, a devout and somewhat reserved youth, must have been captivated, perhaps even overwhelmed, by the vivacious Duchess. Eleanor, accustomed to the more refined and cultured courts of Aquitaine, where troubadours sang of courtly love and women held sway, found herself married to a king who, though well-intentioned, was perhaps a little too pious, a little too serious for her taste. The contrast between them was stark, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of devotion and worldliness, duty and desire. The early years of their marriage were marked by the usual royal duties, but also by growing tensions. Eleanor, with her independent mind and political acumen, was not content to be a mere consort. She participated in court life, held her own councils, and even accompanied Louis on campaigns. Her influence was undeniable and perhaps to some unsettling. The court of France, accustomed to a more subdued queen, found Eleanor's spirited nature both fascinating and, at times, scandalous. One of the most significant events of their early reign, and a pivotal moment in their relationship, was the Second Crusade. Preached by the charismatic Bernard of Clairvaux, it stirred the hearts of many across Europe, including Louis VII. He, ever the devout monarch, felt a profound call to defend the Holy Land. Eleanor, perhaps drawn by the adventure, the prestige, or a genuine sense of religious fervour, insisted on accompanying him. This was an extraordinary decision for a queen, and it added a layer of spectacle and controversy to the expedition. They set out in 1147, a grand procession of knights, ladies, and pilgrims, a moving city of faith and ambition. The journey was arduous, fraught with dangers and disagreements. Eleanor, with her ladies-in-waiting, travelled with her own retinue, often adopting the attire of Amazonian warriors, a detail that both fascinated and scandalized chroniclers of the time. Her presence, and the perceived influence she held over Louis, became a source of friction. The crusade itself was a disaster. Mismanagement, internal squabbles, and fierce resistance from Muslim forces led to heavy losses and ultimately failure. The French army suffered greatly in Asia Minor, and the siege of Damascus, a key objective, ended in ignominious retreat. During this trying period, the cracks in Louis and Eleanor's marriage widened into chasms. Whispers of Eleanor's alleged indiscretions, particularly with her uncle Raymond of Antioch, reached Louis's ears. Whether these rumours held any truth or were simply the malicious gossip of a frustrated court, they deeply wounded the pious king. The emotional toll of the crusade, coupled with the personal betrayal he felt, pushed their relationship to its breaking point. Upon their return to France in 1149, the atmosphere between them was frigid. They had 2 daughters, Marie and Alix, but no male heir, a constant source of anxiety for any medieval monarch. The lack of a son was often interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, or more practically, as a threat to the succession. Louis, increasingly convinced that their marriage was invalid, perhaps even incestuous due to a distant family connection, sought an annulment. He consulted with the Pope, Eugene III, who initially resisted, understanding the political ramifications of dissolving such a powerful union. However, the strains were too great. Eleanor herself, chafing under Louis's pious restraint, and perhaps seeking a more vibrant partner, also desired the separation. Historians still debate the precise motivations behind their mutual desire for annulment. Was it primarily Louis's religious scruples and desire for a male heir? Or was it Eleanor's independent spirit and dissatisfaction with a husband she considered too much a monk and too little a king? Perhaps it was a complex interplay of both, fueled by the bitter memories of the failed crusade and the growing chasm in their personalities. Finally, in March 1152, at the Council of Beaugency, their marriage was annulled on the grounds of consanguinity, a common legal loophole in medieval times, meaning they were too closely related for the marriage to be valid in the eyes of the Church. The decision, though seemingly a private matter, sent shockwaves through the political landscape of Europe. Eleanor, once the Queen of France, was now a free woman, and more importantly, still the Duchess of Aquitaine, a prize of immense value. The annulment was a profound miscalculation on Louis VII's part, a decision driven by personal piety and dynastic anxiety, but with catastrophic geopolitical consequences. He had, in essence, released the largest and wealthiest duchy in France from Capetian control. The ink on the annulment papers was barely dry when Eleanor, with characteristic swiftness and shrewdness, made her next move. Just 8 weeks after her annulment, in May 1152, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was a dynamic, ambitious and energetic young man, 11 years her junior. He was a force of nature, a brilliant military commander, and a skilled administrator. This marriage was not just a personal union, it was a political earthquake. With Eleanor's lands, Henry now controlled an enormous swathe of territory, stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. A vast Angevin empire that dwarfed Louis VII's royal domain. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry became King of England as Henry II, adding the English crown to his already formidable collection of titles. The consequences for France were immediate and dire. Louis VII, who had sought to consolidate Capetian power, now found himself surrounded by the lands of his formidable new rival. The King of France, once the preeminent monarch in his own realm, now held less territory than his vassal, the King of England. This dramatic shift laid the foundation for centuries of conflict between England and France, a rivalry that would shape the destiny of both nations. The Plantagenet Empire, born from the dissolution of Louis and Eleanor's marriage, became a constant threat to Capetian authority, a thorn in the side of the French monarchy that would not be removed for generations. Louis VII, though a pious man, was not a weak king. He understood the gravity of the situation and spent the remainder of his reign attempting to counter the growing power of Henry II. He supported Henry's rebellious sons, fueled internal dissent within the Angevin Empire, and engaged in a series of skirmishes and diplomatic maneuvers. But the initial blow had been struck, and the balance of power irrevocably altered. His later years saw him marry twice more, first to Constance of Castile, with whom he had another daughter, and then finally to Adela of Champagne, who bore him the long-awaited male heir, Philip, in 1165. This son, who would later be known as Philip Augustus, would prove to be one of France's most formidable kings, a monarch who would dedicate his life to dismantling the Angevin Empire and restoring Capetian supremacy. But that was still in the future. For now, Louis VII had to contend with the immediate consequences of his choices. The story of Louis and Eleanor is more than just a tale of a failed marriage. It's a vivid illustration of how personal decisions, intertwined with the intricate web of medieval politics, could reshape entire continents. Eleanor, through her 2 marriages, profoundly influenced the geopolitical landscape of Western Europe. She was a woman ahead of her time, a figure of immense power and agency, whose choices reverberated through history. Louis VII, the pious king, continued to rule France, his reign marked by a deepening commitment to religious institutions and a more cautious approach to foreign policy. He was instrumental in the construction of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, laying its foundation stone in 1163, a testament to his enduring faith. He also fostered the growth of monastic orders and promoted intellectual life, contributing to the cultural flourishing of the Capetian era. His reign, though overshadowed by the loss of Aquitaine, was not without its achievements. He maintained the stability of the Capetian monarchy and laid some of the groundwork for the administrative reforms that his son, Philip Augustus, would later implement. Yet the shadow of Eleanor and Henry II loomed large. The rivalry between the Capetians and the Plantagenets defined the political landscape for decades. It was a struggle for control over French territory, a contest for prestige, and a clash of 2 powerful dynasties. Louis VII, perhaps a little too gentle for the cutthroat world of medieval power politics, had inadvertently created the very challenge that would define his son's reign. The legacy of Louis VII is complex. He was a king of deep personal piety and good intentions, but his most significant political decision, the annulment of his marriage to Eleanor, had unforeseen and monumental consequences. It was a moment when personal desire and political expediency collided, irrevocably altering the course of French and English history. The echoes of that annulment would resonate for centuries, shaping alliances, sparking wars, and defining the very borders of nations. His reign, from 1137 to 1180, saw France navigate a period of intense change and external pressure. He was a king who, despite his personal struggles and political setbacks, managed to maintain the integrity of the Capetian domain and ensure a smooth succession. He left his son, Philip Augustus, a kingdom that, while challenged, was fundamentally strong, with a burgeoning economy and a growing sense of national identity. The stage was set for the next act in the Capetian drama, an act that would see the French monarchy rise to new heights of power and influence, largely in response to the very challenges created during Louis VII's reign. The seeds of future conflicts and triumphs were sown in those tumultuous years, a testament to the enduring impact of a king who, though perhaps not as outwardly formidable as his rivals, played a crucial role in the unfolding tapestry of French history. The 12th century, with its burgeoning cities and shifting allegiances, had prepared the ground. But it was Philip II, known as Philip Augustus, who would truly cultivate the soil of France into a unified kingdom, forever altering the trajectory of the Capetian dynasty. Born in 1165, Philip's reign, spanning an astonishing 43 years from 1180 to 1223, marked a profound turning point, transforming a relatively weak feudal overlord into a formidable monarch. He inherited a kingdom still largely fragmented, a patchwork of lordships where the King of France's direct authority often extended little beyond his own royal domain, the Ile-de-France. Yet he possessed a keen intellect, a strategic mind, and an unwavering ambition that would prove instrumental in consolidating Capetian power. His early years were spent navigating the treacherous currents of baronial politics, a masterclass in diplomacy and subtle coercion. He was crowned co-king with his ailing father, Louis VII, at the tender age of 14, a precocious ascent that hinted at the extraordinary reign to come. Louis VII, ever pious but perhaps less politically astute, had left his son a kingdom surrounded by powerful vassals, chief among them the sprawling Angevin Empire of the Plantagenets, which, under Henry II of England, controlled vast swathes of France, Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, Poitou, Aquitaine, and Gascony. This vast territorial anomaly, where the English king held more French land than the French king himself, was the central challenge Philip Augustus was determined to overcome. Philip's strategy was multifaceted, a blend of military prowess, shrewd legal maneuvering, and a deep understanding of feudal obligations. He understood that the Plantagenet grip on France was not solely a military one, but also a matter of tangled feudal ties. He would exploit every weakness, every internal squabble within the Angevin family. Henry II's sons, Richard the Lionheart and John Lackland, were often at odds with their father and with each other, a family drama that Philip expertly orchestrated to his own advantage. He played them against each other, offering support to one rebellious son, then another, sowing discord and weakening the formidable Angevin edifice from within. One of his earliest and most significant campaigns involved the county of Flanders, a wealthy and strategically important region. Through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic negotiation, Philip managed to annex a portion of Vermandois and Artois in 1185, adding these rich territories to the royal domain. This was a significant step, demonstrating his resolve and capacity for territorial expansion. But the true prize, the ultimate challenge, remained the Plantagenet lands. The Third Crusade, launched in response to Saladin's capture of Jerusalem in 1187, offered Philip an unexpected opportunity to gauge his strength against Richard the Lionheart. Both kings, along with the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, took the cross. While the crusade itself was a complex tapestry of heroism and political intrigue, Philip's participation, though shorter than Richard's, was not without its strategic benefits. He returned to France in 1191, citing ill health, leaving Richard to continue the fight. This early departure, while criticized by some, allowed Philip to consolidate his position and, more importantly, to begin undermining Richard's holdings in France while the English king was still far away. Upon Richard's return and subsequent capture and ransom by Emperor Henry VI, Philip's machinations intensified. He formed an alliance with Richard's younger brother, John, promising him support in exchange for territorial concessions. This betrayal, though ultimately unsuccessful in preventing Richard's return to England, further exacerbated the animosity between the two kings. The ensuing years saw a series of skirmishes and sieges, a relentless war of attrition between Philip and Richard, a brilliant military commander, often held his own, but Philip's patience and strategic depth was slowly wearing him down. The construction of Chateau Gaillard, Richard's magnificent fortress overlooking the Seine, was a testament to the intensity of their rivalry and Richard's determination to protect Normandy. The sudden death of Richard the Lionheart in 1199, struck by a crossbow bolt during a siege in Limousin, dramatically altered the landscape. His successor, John Lackland, was a monarch of a very different temperament, less charismatic, less militarily gifted, and often prone to political blunders. Philip Augustus seized this moment with ruthless efficiency. The immediate catalyst was the case of Arthur of Brittany, John's nephew, who also had a claim to the English throne and the Angevin territories. When John captured and allegedly murdered Arthur in 1203, Philip, as John's feudal overlord for his French lands, summoned him to the French court to answer for his actions. John, predictably, refused to appear. This refusal provided Philip with the perfect legal pretext. In a move that underscored the evolving power of the French monarchy, Philip declared John's French fiefs forfeit due to his failure to fulfill his feudal obligations. This legal judgment, a bold assertion of royal authority, paved the way for military action. The ensuing campaigns from 1202 to 1204 were a masterclass in siege warfare and strategic conquest. Philip systematically captured key Angevin strongholds. Château Gaillard, considered impregnable, fell in 1204 after a lengthy and arduous siege, a testament to Philip's engineering prowess and perseverance. Normandy, the ancestral heartland of the Plantagenets in France, was swiftly brought under direct royal control. Anjou, Maine, Touraine, and Brittany soon followed. By 1205, the vast majority of the continental Angevin Empire had been absorbed into the French royal domain. This was a monumental achievement, transforming the map of France and the balance of power in Western Europe. The King of France was no longer merely a figurehead. He was now the dominant power in his own kingdom. Historians still debate the exact reasons for John's catastrophic loss of Normandy. Was it his personal incompetence, Richard's earlier exhaustion of resources, or Philip's superior strategy and the growing institutional strength of the Capetian monarchy? It was likely a combination of all these factors, but Philip's relentless pursuit of his objectives was undoubtedly the most decisive. The final act of this grand drama unfolded at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214. This was not just a battle. It was a defining moment for the nascent French nation. John, seeking to reclaim his lost territories, formed a grand coalition against Philip, uniting with Emperor Otto IV of the Holy Roman Empire and various Flemish and German nobles. The two armies met near Bouvines in Flanders. Philip, though outnumbered, led his forces with courage and tactical brilliance. The battle was fierce, a brutal clash of cavalry and infantry, but the French forces, fighting under the oriflamme, the sacred battle standard of France, emerged victorious. Bouvines was a resounding triumph for Philip Augustus. It shattered the coalition against him, solidified his territorial gains, and perhaps most importantly, fostered a nascent sense of French national identity. Chroniclers of the time speak of the jubilant reception Philip received upon his return to Paris, a hero's welcome that transcended mere feudal loyalty. The victory at Bouvines confirmed the Capetian dynasty's preeminence and marked a decisive shift in the power dynamics of Europe. Beyond military conquest, Philip Augustus was also a shrewd administrator and a visionary builder. He understood that a strong monarchy required a robust administrative apparatus. He introduced baillis and seneschaux, royal officials who administered justice and collected taxes in the newly acqua. Red territories, effectively extending royal authority and bypassing the traditional feudal lords. He also invested heavily in the infrastructure of his kingdom, particularly Paris. He paved the muddy streets, built the first royal palace in the Louvre, though it was then a fortress, not the museum we know today, and constructed the city walls that bore his name, the Enceinte de Philippe Auguste. These walls, some remnants of which can still be seen today, were a symbol of royal power and a testament to his commitment to making Paris the true capital of France. His reign also saw the flourishing of the University of Paris, which he actively supported, recognizing the importance of education and intellectual development. He granted privileges to students and masters, fostering an environment of learning that would make Paris one of the intellectual centers of Europe. This patronage of learning, alongside his military and administrative reforms, painted a picture of a king who understood the multifaceted nature of true power. One lesser-known detail about Philip Augustus is his deep fascination with urban planning and hygiene. He was reportedly disgusted by the stench and filth of medieval Paris, and personally ordered the paving of its main streets, a revolutionary undertaking for its time. He also decreed the digging of public wells and the construction of latrines, all aimed at improving the living conditions of his subjects and, by extension, the image of his royal capital. This practical concern for urban improvement often gets overshadowed by his military exploits, but it speaks to a pragmatic and forward-thinking aspect of his rule. Philip Augustus's reign was a period of profound transformation for France. He inherited a fragmented kingdom and bequeathed to his successors a significantly enlarged and more centralized state. He dramatically expanded the royal domain, making the Capetian king the largest landowner in France. He established a more efficient royal administration, laying the groundwork for a truly national bureaucracy. And perhaps, most significantly, he broke the stranglehold of the Plantagenets on French soil, ensuring that the future of France would be shaped by its own monarchs, not by foreign kings. His legacy was immense, setting the stage for the later developments of the French monarchy. He transformed the Capetian dynasty from one of survival to one of dominance. His strategic genius and relentless pursuit of royal power laid the foundations for the centralized, powerful French state that would emerge in the centuries to come. The whispers of the wind through the newly built walls of Paris, perhaps, carried the promise of a united France, a vision that Philip Augustus had, against all odds, begun to realize. His death in 1223 marked the end of an era, but the seeds he had sown would continue to blossom, forever altering the course of French history. The kingdom he left behind was infinitely stronger, more cohesive, and more powerful than the one he had inherited, a testament to his extraordinary vision and unwavering determination. The tapestry of Capetian rule, woven through centuries of succession and struggle, found its most luminous thread in the figure of Louis IX, a king whose very name would become synonymous with sainthood. Born in 1214, the son of Louis VIII and Blanche of Castile, Louis ascended the throne in 1226 at the tender age of 12. His early years of kingship were shaped profoundly by his formidable mother, Blanche, who served as regent. She was a woman of iron will and keen political acumen, navigating the turbulent waters of a realm still bristling with powerful, semi-independent vassals. It was Blanche who crushed the Albigensian Crusade in the south, consolidating royal power and bringing the Languedoc firmly under Capetian control. Her unwavering devotion to her son's education, both spiritual and secular, instilled in him a deep sense of justice and piety that would define his reign. Louis, even as a young man, exhibited an unusual gravity and earnestness. He was not merely a pious prince. He was a king who genuinely sought to embody Christian ideals in his governance. This was a radical notion in an era where power was often brutally wielded for personal gain. His court became a beacon of moral rectitude, a stark contrast to the often licentious courts of his contemporaries. He heard Mass daily, fasted rigorously, and devoted himself to prayer. Yet he was no cloistered monk. He was a king who actively engaged with the world, seeking to apply his faith to the practicalities of ruling. One of Louis's most enduring contributions was his reform of the French legal system. He established a network of royal courts, strengthening the king's justice over the often arbitrary justice of local lords. He abolished trial by ordeal, a practice where guilt or innocence was determined by dangerous physical tests, replacing it with a system based on evidence and testimony. This was a monumental shift, a move towards a more rational and equitable legal framework. He also introduced the concept of the enquêteurs, royal investigators who travelled throughout the kingdom to hear complaints against royal officials and ensure justice was administered fairly. These reforms, begun in the 1240s and continuing throughout his reign, laid the groundwork for a more centralized and standardized legal system that would eventually evolve into the modern French judiciary. Louis's commitment to justice extended beyond his own borders. He became renowned as an impartial arbiter in disputes between European rulers, often invited to mediate conflicts. His reputation for fairness was such that even King Henry III of England, a frequent adversary, sought his judgment in the Mise of Amiens in 1264, a dispute concerning English baronial rebellions. Though his ruling favoured the English king, it underscored Louis's widely recognised integrity. This elevation of the king's role from mere feudal overlord to a moral authority figure, a dispenser of divine justice, significantly enhanced the prestige and influence of the French monarchy across Europe. Perhaps the most defining aspect of Louis IX's reign, and certainly the most dramatic, was his unwavering commitment to the Crusades. He saw it as his sacred duty to reclaim the Holy Land, a personal mission that deeply influenced his policies and ultimately led to his demise. He led 2 major crusades, both fraught with immense challenges and ultimately unsuccessful in their primary objective. The Seventh Crusade, launched in 1248, saw Louis lead a massive French army to Egypt, hoping to use it as a springboard to Jerusalem. The campaign, however, was plagued by disease, strategic missteps, and fierce Mamluk resistance. Louis himself was captured in 1250 after the disastrous Battle of Farasker, along with much of his army. He was eventually ransomed for a colossal sum, but the experience left an indelible mark. Despite this crushing defeat, Louis remained in the Holy Land for 4 more years, attempting to rebuild alliances, fortify Crusader strongholds, and negotiate for the release of Christian prisoners. He poured vast sums of royal treasury into these efforts, demonstrating a personal dedication that bordered on obsession. His return to France in 1254 was met with a mixture of relief and admiration, but the dream of Jerusalem continued to burn within him. Back in France, Louis continued his reforms, focusing on internal peace and prosperity. He fostered economic growth, encouraged trade, and patronized arts and architecture. The Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, consecrated in 1248, a breathtaking reliquary built to house Christ's crown of thorns and other sacred relics acquired by Louis, stands as a testament to his piety and artistic vision. Its soaring stained glass windows, depicting biblical scenes with unparalleled brilliance, created an ethereal space designed to transport the worshipper heavenward. A physical manifestation of Louis's spiritual aspirations. Yet the call of the Holy Land remained strong. In 1267, Louis announced his intention to embark on another crusade, the Eighth Crusade. This decision was met with considerable opposition from his advisors, and even his own family, who had witnessed the immense cost and suffering of the previous expedition. The kingdom was at peace, prosperous, and his presence was greatly valued. Historians still debate the precise motivations behind Louis's Second Crusade. Was it a genuine spiritual conviction that transcended practical concerns? Was it a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation after the previous failure? Or perhaps a deep-seated belief that a Christian king's ultimate duty lay in the defense of Christendom, regardless of the odds? Whatever the precise blend of reasons, Louis was resolute. In 1270, he set sail with his army. Not for Egypt this time, but for Tunis, hoping to convert its ruler and then use it as a base to attack Egypt. However, the expedition was quickly struck by an epidemic of dysentery. The disease ravaged the French camp, claiming the lives of many, including Louis's own son, John Tristan. Finally, on August 25, 1270, Louis IX himself succumbed to the illness, dying in Tunis. His last words, whispered amidst the fever, were reportedly Jerusalem. The death of Louis IX marked the end of an era, but his legacy was just beginning. He was canonized as Saint Louis by the Catholic Church in 1297, a testament to his extraordinary piety and his unwavering commitment to justice. He became the only French king to be canonized, an honor that further cemented the Capetian dynasty's spiritual authority and prestige. His reign is often viewed as the zenith of medieval French monarchy, a period when the Capetian kings truly embodied the ideal of a Christian ruler, balancing spiritual devotion with effective governance. Louis's impact was profound. His legal reforms strengthened the royal prerogative and centralized power, laying crucial groundwork for the future absolutism of the French monarchy. His moral authority elevated the Capetian dynasty above mere feudal lords, establishing them as a moral and political force in Europe. The meticulous records kept during his reign, from judicial proceedings to financial accounts, provide an invaluable window into the administrative workings of medieval France, a testament to his methodical approach to governance. One lesser-known detail about Louis IX is his personal practice of washing the feet of the poor and lepers. A profound act of humility and charity that underscored his deep spiritual convictions and set him apart from many of his royal contemporaries who maintained a more distant and ceremonial relationship with their subjects. This act, often performed privately, speaks volumes about the man behind the crown, a king who genuinely sought to live out the gospel message. His successor, his son Philip III, known as Philip the Bold, inherited a kingdom strengthened by his father's reforms and endowed with immense prestige. Philip, though lacking his father's saintly aura, was a competent ruler who continued the work of consolidating royal power. He annexed several territories, including the county of Toulouse, further expanding the royal domain and weakening the power of the great feudal lords. He also established the Parlement de Paris, a permanent royal court of justice, building upon his father's legal reforms and further centralizing the administration of justice. Philip's reign, from 1270 to 1285, was largely one of stability and continued growth for the Capetian dynasty. He maintained good relations with other European powers, largely avoiding major conflicts, though he did lead an unsuccessful crusade against Aragon in 1285, a campaign that ultimately cost him his life. He died of dysentery, much like his father, while retreating from the siege of Gerona. The mantle of Capetian rule then passed to Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, a king whose reign would mark a significant shift in the exercise of royal power and a dramatic confrontation with the papacy. Born in 1268, Philip ascended the throne in 1285, a young man of striking good looks and an iron will that rivaled his grandmother, Blanche of Castile. He was a king far more concerned with the practicalities of power and the expansion of royal authority than with the spiritual ideals that had guided his grandfather, Saint Louis. Philip the Fair's reign was characterized by an aggressive pursuit of royal revenue and a relentless drive to assert the supremacy of the French crown over all other powers, including the Church. He was a shrewd and calculating monarch, employing a new class of professional administrators and legal scholars, often from the lesser nobility or the bourgeoisie, who were fiercely loyal to the crown. These men, skilled in Roman law, provided the intellectual and practical framework for Philip's ambitious policies. One of Philip's most pressing concerns was finance. The costs of running an increasingly centralized state, maintaining a professional army, and engaging in foreign policy were immense. To meet these demands, Philip resorted to a variety of innovative and often controversial methods. He debased the coinage, reducing the silver content of coins, which led to inflation and economic instability, but provided immediate funds for the royal treasury. He also levied taxes on the clergy, a move that brought him into direct conflict with the papacy. The most famous, and certainly the most dramatic, clash of Philip's reign was with Pope Boniface VIII. The conflict erupted over the issue of royal taxation of the clergy without papal consent. Boniface, a staunch defender of papal supremacy, issued the bull Clericis Laicos in 1296, forbidding secular rulers from taxing the clergy. Philip responded by prohibiting the export of gold and silver from France, effectively cutting off papal revenue from the French Church. This economic pressure forced Boniface to back down temporarily. But the underlying tension remained. The conflict escalated further when Philip arrested a French bishop, Bernard Sacit, on charges of treason. Boniface responded with the bull Ausculta Fili in 1301, asserting the Pope's spiritual and temporal authority over kings. Philip, in a bold and unprecedented move, publicly burned the bull and rallied support from the French nobility and clergy, portraying the Pope as an enemy of the French nation. The climax of this struggle came in 1302 with the issuance of Unum Sanctum, Boniface's most extreme assertion of papal supremacy, declaring that salvation required submission to the Roman pontiff. Philip's response was swift and brutal. In 1303, his chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret, with the support of a powerful Italian noble family, the Colonna, launched an attack on Boniface at Anagni, the Pope's summer residence. The Pope was assaulted and held captive for several days, an event known as the Outrage of Anagni. Though Boniface was eventually freed by local townspeople, the humiliation and shock proved fatal. He died shortly thereafter. This incident shattered the traditional reverence for the papacy, and demonstrated the immense power that a determined monarch could wield against even the spiritual head of Christendom. Philip's influence over the papacy did not end with Boniface's death. He successfully engineered the election of a French pope, Clement V, in 1305. Clement, eager to appease Philip, moved the papal court from Rome to Avignon in 1309, initiating the Avignon papacy, or Babylonian captivity of the Church, a period of nearly 70 years, during which the popes resided in France and were largely under the influence of the French crown. This was a monumental victory for Philip, demonstrating the unprecedented extent of Capetian power. Another infamous episode of Philip's reign was his persecution of the Knights Templar. The Templars, a powerful and wealthy military order, had become a state within a state in France, possessing vast lands and financial resources. Philip, perpetually in need of funds and perhaps wary of their independent power, launched a coordinated attack on the order in 1307. On Friday, October 13, Templars across France were arrested on charges of heresy, idolatry, and various moral transgressions. Under torture, many confessed to fabricated charges. The order was suppressed by papal bull in 1312, and its vast wealth was confiscated by the French crown. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, and other senior Templar leaders were burned at the stake in 1314. The motivations behind this brutal suppression remain a subject of historical debate. Was it purely for financial gain, a genuine belief in their guilt, or a calculated move to eliminate a powerful rival to royal authority? It was likely a complex blend of all three, but the outcome was a dramatic consolidation of royal power and wealth at the expense of a once venerated institution. Philip the Fair's reign, though controversial and often ruthless, significantly strengthened the French monarchy. He transformed the Capetian kingdom from a feudal state into a more centralized and bureaucratic one, laying the foundations for the modern French state. He established a professional administration, developed new methods of taxation, and asserted the king's authority over both the nobility and the church. His actions, while often brutal, were driven by a clear vision of royal power, a vision that moved far beyond the pious ideals of his grandfather, Saint Louis. Philip died in 1314, leaving behind three sons, Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, who would all rule France in quick succession. These reigns, however, would be short and fraught with new challenges, leading to a profound crisis of succession that would ultimately bring an end to the direct line of the Capetian dynasty. The direct line, which had maintained an unbroken male succession for over 3 centuries, was about to face its greatest test. The stability that had been the hallmark of Capetian rule, the very foundation of its legitimacy, was on the verge of crumbling. The stage was set for a new chapter in French history, one marked by uncertainty, conflict, and the emergence of new dynastic claims. The 13th century, a period of remarkable growth and consolidation for the Capetian monarchy, was drawing to a close, and with it, the direct line of the Capetian dynasty itself would soon reach its twilight. But before that fading, a figure of immense power and icy resolve would ascend the throne, a king whose reign would shake the very foundations of medieval Europe. Philip IV, known to history as Philip the Fair, he was a man of striking appearance. His features so finely chiseled, his complexion so pale that he earned his epithet not for his character, which was often seen as ruthless, but for his almost ethereal beauty. Yet beneath that placid exterior lay a will of iron, a mind as sharp and calculating as any in his age, and an ambition but knew few bounds. Philip IV inherited a kingdom that, thanks to the tireless efforts of his predecessors, was largely unified and prosperous. The royal domain had expanded. The administrative machinery was more efficient, and the king's authority, while still challenged, was increasingly recognized as supreme within France. But Philip was not content with mere recognition. He sought absolute, unquestioned dominion, and in his pursuit of this goal, he would clash with the two most powerful institutions of his time, the church and the feudal nobility. His reign, which began in 1285, was marked by a series of dramatic confrontations that redefined the relationship between temporal and spiritual power, and between the king and his vassals. Philip understood that true power lay in financial independence, and he would stop at nothing to fill the royal coffers. His wars, particularly those against England and Flanders, were costly, and he needed new sources of revenue. This need would bring him into direct conflict with the papacy, then occupied by Boniface VIII, a man as proud and unyielding as Philip himself. The first major clash erupted over the king's right to tax the clergy. For centuries, the church had largely been exempt from royal taxation, its wealth considered sacred and dedicated to God. But Philip, facing mounting debts, decreed that the clergy in France must contribute to the defence of the realm. Boniface VIII, incensed by this perceived encroachment on ecclesiastical privilege, responded with the papal bull Clericis Laicos in 1296, which forbade any cleric from paying taxes to a lay ruler without papal consent, under pain of excommunication. The air crackled with tension. Philip, never one to back down, retaliated by prohibiting the export of gold, silver, and other valuables from France, effectively cutting off the papacy's significant revenue stream from the French church. This economic pressure soon forced Boniface to a temporary retreat, and he issued a new bull, Etsi de Statu, which allowed the king to tax the clergy in emergencies. It was a victory for Philip, a clear signal that the King of France would not bow to papal authority when he believed his kingdom's interests were at stake. This uneasy truce, however, was short-lived. The deeper issue of royal versus papal supremacy continued to simmer. The flashpoint for their next, more explosive confrontation came in 1301, when Philip arrested Bernard Sassé, the Bishop of Pamiers, on charges of treason and heresy. Sassé, a staunch advocate of papal supremacy, had openly insulted the king and questioned his legitimacy. Philip, seeing this as an affront to his sovereign authority, demanded that Boniface allow Sassé to be tried in a royal court. Boniface, viewing the arrest of a bishop as a grave violation of ecclesiastical immunity, demanded Sassé's release and summoned Philip to Rome to account for his actions. The ensuing exchange of letters and bulls was a war of words, each side asserting its absolute right. Boniface issued the bull Ausculta Fili in 1301, which began with the words, "Listen, my son, to the precepts of a father," and unequivocally asserted the Pope's spiritual and temporal authority over all earthly rulers. Philip, in a masterful stroke of propaganda, had the bull publicly burned and replaced with a forged, much more aggressive version that made Boniface appear to claim direct temporal overlordship of France, thereby rallying nationalistic sentiment against the Pope. This manipulation of public opinion was a hallmark of Philip's reign, demonstrating his understanding of the nascent power of propaganda. The conflict reached its dramatic climax in 1302 with the issuance of Unam Sanctum, one of the most famous papal bulls in history. In it, Boniface VIII declared that there is one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, outside of which there is no salvation, and that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. This was an unambiguous assertion of papal supremacy, both spiritual and temporal, over all secular rulers, including the King of France. Philip's response was swift and audacious. He convened an assembly of French nobles and clergy who overwhelmingly sided with their king, denouncing Boniface as a heretic, a simoniac, and an illegitimate pope. Philip then dispatched his chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret, a brilliant but ruthless lawyer, to Italy with a small force to arrest Boniface and bring him before a general council to answer for his alleged crimes. In September 1303, Nogaret, aided by members of the powerful Colonna family, enemies of Boniface, stormed the papal palace in Anagni. The elderly pope, dressed in his pontifical robes, bravely confronted his captors. He was reportedly slapped by Shara Colonna, a moment known as the outrage of Anagni. Though Boniface was rescued by the local populace a few days later, the humiliation and shock proved too much for the aged pontiff, and he died a month later. The death of Boniface VIII marked a turning point in the history of the papacy and the relationship between church and state. No longer would a pope dare to openly challenge a powerful monarch in such a direct manner. Philip had demonstrated that the temporal power of a king, backed by a unified nation, could indeed defy and even humble the spiritual authority of the Pope. This episode is a prime example of the growing strength of national monarchies and the decline of universal papal claims in the late medieval period. Historians still debate the extent of Philip's direct involvement in planning the Anagni incident. Was it intended to be an arrest or a more violent deposition? The swiftness and brutality of the act suggest a calculated risk, a desperate measure to assert royal dominance. Philip's relentless pursuit of power and wealth also led him to target another immensely powerful and wealthy institution, the Knights Templar. This military order, founded during the Crusades, had grown into a vast international organization, possessing immense landholdings, castles, and a sophisticated banking system that made them creditors to many European monarchs, including Philip himself. They were, in essence, a state within a state, answerable only to the Pope, and their wealth was a tempting prize for a king perpetually in need of funds. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, in a move that still sends shivers down the spine of history, Philip ordered the simultaneous arrest of all Templars in France. The charges levelled against them were shocking: heresy, idolatry, worshipping a head known as Baphomet, sodomy, spitting on the cross, and other blasphemous acts. These accusations were almost certainly fabricated or exaggerated, designed to discredit the order and justify its seizure. The Templars, caught completely by surprise, were subjected to brutal torture by royal inquisitors, who extracted confessions, often under duress. The trials that followed were a travesty of justice. Despite recantations by many Templars who later denied their confessions, Philip exerted immense pressure on Pope Clement V, a Frenchman who owed his election to Philip's influence and had moved the papacy to Avignon, beginning the Avignon papacy, or Babylonian captivity of the Church. Clement, caught between his duty to the Church and his dependence on Philip, reluctantly issued the bull Vox in Excelso in 1312, officially suppressing the Order of the Temple. The Templars' vast wealth and properties in France were largely confiscated by the crown, though nominally they were supposed to go to the Hospitallers. The final act of this grim drama unfolded in 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, along with other high-ranking officials, had initially confessed under torture, but later recanted, loudly proclaiming the innocence of the order from a scaffold erected in front of Notre Dame. Enraged by their defiance, Philip immediately condemned them as relapsed heretics. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and Geoffroy de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, were burned at the stake on an island in the Seine. Legend has it that as the flames consumed him, Molay cursed Philip and Clement, summoning them to appear before God's judgment within a year. Both men died within months of Molay's execution, a coincidence that fueled popular belief in the curse. The suppression of the Templars remains one of the darkest stains on Philip's reign, a chilling example of a monarch's willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his political and financial ends. It also highlights a lesser-known detail of medieval justice, the use of torture to extract confessions, which, while not unique to Philip's reign, was employed with chilling efficiency against the Templars. Beyond his conflicts with the Church and the Templars, Philip also worked tirelessly to centralize royal power within France, often at the expense of the feudal nobility. He continued the Capetian tradition of expanding royal jurisdiction, replacing local feudal customs with royal law, and diminishing the power of independent lords. He relied heavily on a new class of educated, loyal administrators, often from the lesser nobility or the bourgeoisie, who were directly accountable to the crown. These legists, or men of law, were instrumental in crafting the legal arguments that justified Philip's actions against the Pope and the Templars, asserting the king's divine right and absolute sovereignty within his kingdom. Philip's administrative reforms included the creation of specialized royal courts and financial bodies, further professionalizing the machinery of government. He also began the practice of summoning representatives of the towns, clergy, and nobility to assemblies known as the Estates General. While initially convened primarily to gain support for his policies, particularly his conflicts with the papacy, these assemblies laid the groundwork for a more representative form of government, albeit one still firmly under royal control. He was a master of public relations for his time, using these assemblies and carefully crafted propaganda to rally national support behind his policies. Framing his struggles with the Pope as a defense of the French nation against foreign interference, his foreign policy was equally ambitious. He continued the long-standing struggle against England over Gascony, a conflict that would eventually simmer into the 100 Years' War. He also engaged in protracted and costly wars with Flanders, a wealthy and strategically important region. These wars, while often inconclusive in the short term, contributed to the king's constant need for funds, which in turn fueled his aggressive financial policies and his clashes with the Church and the Templars. Philip IV's reign represents a pivotal moment in the evolution of the French monarchy and the broader history of Europe. He transformed the nature of kingship, asserting a level of royal authority that was unprecedented. He effectively broke the back of papal supremacy in temporal affairs, ushering in an era where national monarchs, rather than the Pope, held ultimate sway within their own borders. He laid the foundations for a more centralized, bureaucratic state, paving the way for the absolute monarchies of later centuries. His actions, while often ruthless and controversial, undeniably strengthened the French crown and solidified the kingdom's position as a major European power. Yet, despite his immense power, Philip the Fair's personal life was marked by a chilling detachment. He was known for his silence, his impassive demeanor, and his almost robotic efficiency. He rarely spoke, preferring to let his actions and the words of his trusted advisers speak for him. Perhaps these silent walls of his chambers, in the Louvre or the Palais de la Cité, whispered only to his own ambition, reflecting back the image of a king who saw himself as God's chosen instrument, destined to reshape the world according to his own unbending will. His legacy is complex and debated. Was he a visionary statesman who forged a modern nation-state, or a tyrannical despot who crushed all opposition in his path? Historians still grapple with the motivations behind his actions, particularly the sheer audacity of his attacks on the papacy and the Templars. Was it pure greed, a calculated move to consolidate power, or a genuine belief in the divine right of kings to rule without external interference? The truth likely lies in a combination of these factors, intertwined with the political and economic pressures of his time. Philip IV died in 1314, shortly after the execution of Jacques de Molay, as the legend foretold. His death brought an end to an era of extraordinary royal power, but it did not bring an end to the Capetian dynasty, at least not immediately. He left behind 3 sons, Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, all of whom would ascend to the throne in quick succession. However, none of them possessed their father's formidable intellect, his iron will, or his ruthless efficiency. The direct line of the Capetians, which had stretched unbroken for over 3 centuries, was about to face its greatest challenge, the lack of a male heir. The stability that Philip the Fair had so painstakingly built would soon unravel, leading to a period of uncertainty and ultimately the end of the direct Capetian line, plunging France into a new era of dynastic struggle and devastating conflict. The seeds of the 100 Years' War, sown by Philip's aggressive foreign policy and his relentless pursuit of power, were already beginning to sprout, ready to engulf the kingdom in a century of turmoil. The grand tapestry of the Capetian dynasty, woven so intricately for over 3 centuries, began to fray with the passing of Philip IV. His reign, marked by a formidable assertion of royal power and a relentless pursuit of his kingdom's interests, had paradoxically sown the seeds of its own undoing in the matter of succession. Philip, the Iron King, had fathered 3 sons who would each in turn wear the crown of France: Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV. Yet, none of them would manage to secure the direct Capetian line, leading to a profound dynastic crisis that would reshape the very fabric of France. Louis X, the eldest, inherited the throne in the year 1314. He was a man of somewhat contradictory nature, often described as impetuous and pleasure-loving, yet also capable of flashes of surprising determination. His brief reign, lasting only 2 years, was overshadowed by the lingering consequences of his father's policies and the scandal that had rocked the royal family just before Philip IV's death. The Tour de Nesle affair, a sordid tale of alleged adultery involving Louis's wife, Margaret of Burgundy, and the wives of his 2 younger brothers, had cast a dark shadow over the Capetian women. Margaret was imprisoned and her alleged lovers executed, a stark reminder of the unforgiving justice of the age. This scandal, though primarily a personal tragedy, had wider implications for the stability of the succession, raising questions about the legitimacy of any children born to the implicated princesses. Louis X's short time on the throne was largely consumed by efforts to reverse some of his father's more unpopular financial measures and to consolidate his own authority. He granted a number of charters to various towns and provinces, seemingly in an attempt to appease discontent and secure loyalty. One notable act in the year 1315 was his decree that any slave setting foot on French soil would become free, a testament to a burgeoning, if limited, concept of individual liberty within the kingdom. Yet his reign was too brief for any truly lasting impact. He died suddenly in the year 1316, leaving behind a pregnant wife, Clementia of Hungary, and a young daughter, Joan, from his first marriage. The death of Louis X plunged France into an unprecedented constitutional dilemma. For the first time in over 300 years, there was no clear adult male heir to immediately ascend the throne. Clementia gave birth a few months later to a son, John I, who was immediately proclaimed king. But this infant king, born into a whirlwind of expectation and anxiety, lived for only 5 days. His death, sudden and tragic, left France without a direct male heir and reopened the question of succession with even greater urgency. With the infant John's passing, the throne fell to Louis X's younger brother, Philip, Count of Poitiers. Philip, a more pragmatic and politically astute man than his elder brother, acted swiftly to secure his claim. He convened an assembly of barons and prelates who, after much deliberation, recognized his right to the crown. This decision, however, was not without controversy. Louis X's daughter, Joan, was still alive, and her rights to the throne were championed by some, particularly her maternal uncle, Eudes IV, Duke of Burgundy. The assembly, however, ultimately upheld the principle that a woman could not inherit the French crown, a custom that would later be formalized as the Salic law. This was a pivotal moment in French history, establishing a precedent that would have profound consequences in the centuries to come, particularly during the 100 Years' War. Historians still debate the exact origins and motivations behind the application of this law at this specific juncture. Was it a long-standing, albeit unwritten custom, or a convenient legal justification to prevent a potentially weak female succession and maintain stability during a turbulent period? The truth likely lies in a complex interplay of tradition and political expediency. Philip V, known as the Tall, proved to be a more effective ruler than his brother. His reign, though also short, from 1316 to 1322, saw a renewed effort to centralize royal administration and reform the kingdom's finances. He attempted to standardize weights and measures across France, a visionary, if ultimately unsuccessful, endeavor for its time, highlighting a desire for greater unity and efficiency. He also continued his father's policies against the Knights Templar, though with less ferocity, and sought to maintain peace within the kingdom. However, fate, it seemed, had a cruel hand to play for the Capetian line. Philip V himself died without a surviving male heir, leaving behind 4 daughters. The succession crisis deepened. With Philip V's death, the crown passed to his youngest brother, Charles, Count of La Marche. Charles IV, the Fair, ascended the throne in 1322. Like his brothers, Charles's reign was relatively brief, lasting from 1322 to 1328. He was a king of quiet dignity, often described as more reserved than his elder siblings, Yet he too was a capable administrator. He continued the work of strengthening the royal government and maintaining order. His reign was marked by a series of diplomatic engagements, including efforts to mediate disputes between England and Scotland, and a brief conflict with England over the Duchy of Aquitaine. Charles IV, like his brothers, faced the persistent challenge of securing a male heir. His first two marriages produced only daughters. His third marriage, to Jean d'Evreux, was entered into with the fervent hope of producing a son. For a time, the kingdom held its breath, praying for the continuation of the direct line. But it was not to be. In 1328, Charles IV died, leaving behind a pregnant wife. The hope for a male heir now rested entirely on the unborn child. The anticipation that followed Charles IV's death was palpable, a collective anxiety that permeated every corner of the kingdom. The direct Capetian line, which had seemed so robust for centuries, now hung by a thread. When Jean d'Evreux finally gave birth, it was to a daughter, Blanche. With this birth, the direct male line of Hugh Capet, which had endured for 341 years and through 13 kings, came to an end. It was a moment of profound significance, a historical turning point that few could have fully grasped at the time. The unbroken chain, stretching back to the year 987, was finally severed. The extinction of the direct Capetian line immediately triggered a fierce dynastic struggle. The principle established during Philip V's succession, that women could not inherit the French throne, now came into full force. This meant that Charles IV's daughters, like those of his brothers, were excluded from the succession. The closest male relative, according to feudal custom, was Philip, Count of Valois, a cousin of the deceased kings, being the son of Charles of Valois, a younger brother of Philip IV. His claim was strong, based on his direct male descent from a Capetian prince. However, there was another powerful claimant, Edward III of England. Edward was the son of Isabella, the only surviving daughter of Philip IV. His argument was that while his mother, Isabella, might be barred from inheriting the throne herself, she could transmit a right to her son. This was a subtle but crucial distinction, and one that had precedent in other European monarchies. The French nobility, however, largely rejected this interpretation, adhering to the stricter application of the Salic law. They argued that a woman could not transmit a right she herself did not possess. This dispute over succession, rooted in the tragic inability of Philip IV's sons to produce male heirs, became the primary catalyst for the 100 Years' War, a conflict that would devastate France for over a century. The end of the direct Capetian line was not merely a change of ruling family. It marked the end of an era. The Capetians had, over 3 centuries, transformed a fragmented collection of feudal lordships into a nascent kingdom, laying the foundations for the modern French state. They had established Paris as its beating heart, built magnificent cathedrals, and fostered a distinct French identity. Their rule, though not without its challenges and internal conflicts, had provided a remarkable degree of stability and continuity. The reigns of Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, though brief and ultimately tragic in their failure to secure the direct succession, were not without their own merits. Each king, in his own way, contributed to the ongoing process of state building, refining administrative structures, and grappling with the complex social and economic issues of their time. They inherited a powerful, centralized monarchy from their father, Philip IV, and largely succeeded in maintaining its authority, even as the shadow of dynastic uncertainty loomed ever larger. The swift succession of three brothers, each dying without a surviving male heir, was an extraordinary stroke of misfortune, a statistical anomaly that defied the historical norm of the Capetian dynasty. For generations, the Capetians had been blessed with an abundance of male heirs, a phenomenon so consistent that it was often attributed to divine favor. The sudden reversal of this fortune, the curse of the Capetians, as some later called it, seemed to underscore the fragility of even the most established power structures. Perhaps the very strength and ambition of Philip IV, who had pushed the boundaries of royal power to their limit, had somehow exhausted the dynasty's wellspring. Or perhaps it was simply the cruel caprice of fate, a stark reminder that even kings, for all their power, were subject to the whims of mortality and biology. The transition from the direct Capetian line to the House of Valois was not entirely seamless, but it was generally accepted by the French nobility, who preferred a French-born king to an English one. Philip VI, the first Valois king, ascended the throne in 1328, marking the beginning of a new chapter in French history. Yet, the ghost of the Capetian succession crisis would haunt France for decades, providing a constant source of legitimacy for English claims and fueling the fires of war. The passing of the direct Capetians left an indelible mark on the collective memory of France. Their long, continuous reign had instilled a deep sense of dynastic legitimacy and a powerful connection between the king and the kingdom. The new Valois kings, though Capetians by blood through a collateral branch, would spend much of their early reigns asserting their right to rule, often in direct opposition to the English Plantagenets. The narrative of a broken line, of a kingdom suddenly adrift without its direct, divinely sanctioned ruler, became a powerful undercurrent in the political discourse of the time. The legacy of these final Capetian kings, Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, is often overshadowed by the dramatic consequences of their lack of male heirs. Yet they were kings in their own right, each contributing to the evolving story of France. Their reigns, though short, were periods of consolidation, administrative reform, and continued assertion of royal authority. They navigated a complex political landscape, balancing the demands of the nobility, the church, and a burgeoning urban population. Their personal tragedies, the repeated failure to produce a male heir, ultimately led to the greatest dynastic crisis in French history. But their efforts to govern and maintain the kingdom's stability during this period should not be overlooked. The quiet dignity of Charles IV, the administrative acumen of Philip V, and the brief, impetuous reign of Louis X all played their part in the continuous narrative of the Capetian century. Even as that narrative drew to a close, the stage was now set for the long, arduous struggle that would define the next century of French history. A struggle born from the very beds of these last ill-fated Capetian kings. The last breath of Charles IV, a gentle sigh in the cold Parisian air of 1328, marked not only the end of a king's life, but also the end of an era. With him, the direct line of Capetian kings, which had ruled France for over 3 centuries, extinguished itself. For generations, the crown had passed from father to son, a reassuring rhythm that had woven itself into the very fabric of the kingdom. Now, that rhythm was broken. The Salic law, a venerable and often debated custom which barred women from inheriting the throne, now loomed large. Charles IV had left no sons, only a daughter, and her sister Isabella was the mother of England's young King Edward III. The question of succession became a storm cloud gathering over the French court. Should the crown pass through a woman, even if not to her directly, but to her male heir? Or should it remain strictly within the male line, even if it meant reaching for a more distant relative? The French nobility, ever watchful of their own power and prestige, largely favoured the latter. To allow an English king, even one with French blood, to ascend the French throne was unthinkable for many. The idea of a foreign monarch, particularly one whose kingdom was often at odds with France, stirred deep anxieties. And so the French magnates turned their gaze to Philip, Count of Valois, a nephew of Philip IV the Fair. He was a Capetian, yes, but from a cadet branch, a younger line that had branched off generations ago. He was a Frenchman, steeped in French customs, and held lands within the kingdom. His claim, based on male primogeniture and the exclusion of women, was deemed the strongest and most palatable to the French aristocracy. Thus, Philip VI of Valois ascended to the throne, beginning a new dynasty, the House of Valois, and with it, a new chapter in French history. This transition, however, was not without its profound consequences. Across the Channel, Edward III of England, a young and ambitious monarch, felt a deep sense of injustice. His mother, Isabella, was Charles IV's sister, making him the closest male heir by blood, if one were to disregard the Salic law. He had initially paid homage to Philip VI for his Gascon lands, a pragmatic move to secure his continental possessions. But the simmering resentment, the perceived slight to his royal lineage, would not be contained. Historians still debate the precise moment when Edward III's ambition truly shifted from securing his French territories to claiming the French crown itself. Was it a calculated political move, a response to French incursions in Gascony and support for Scotland, or a genuine conviction of his birthright? Regardless, in 1337, Edward formally declared his claim to the French throne. A bold and audacious challenge that ignited the flames of what would become the 100 Years' War. It was a conflict that would rage, with periods of uneasy truce, for over a century, reshaping the political landscape of both kingdoms and leaving an indelible mark on their national identities. The early years of the war were marked by a series of devastating English victories, showcasing the effectiveness of their longbowmen against the more traditional French heavy cavalry. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 was a particularly brutal and iconic engagement. The English, outnumbered, took a strong defensive position, their archers unleashing a deadly hail of arrows upon the charging French knights. The flower of French chivalry was cut down, and the battle became a symbol of a changing era of warfare, where disciplined infantry and projectile weapons could overcome the perceived invincibility of mounted knights. 10 years later, in 1356, the Battle of Poitiers saw another crushing French defeat, with King John II, Philip VI's son, captured by the English. The ransom demanded for his release was astronomical, further crippling the already strained French treasury. These early English triumphs sent shockwaves through France. The prestige of the Valois monarchy, so recently established, was severely damaged. The vulnerability of the kingdom, the inability of its knights to defend its borders, led to widespread disillusionment and unrest. The peasantry, burdened by taxes to fund the war and suffering from the depredations of both armies, rose in revolt in several regions. The most famous of these was the Jacquerie in 1358, a brutal and desperate uprising in northern France, fueled by hunger, resentment, and a sense of betrayal by their lords. Though ultimately suppressed with extreme violence, it highlighted the deep social fissures that the war had exposed and exacerbated. Amidst this turmoil, a new kind of leader emerged in France, Charles V, known as the Wise. He was a stark contrast to his chivalrous but often impetuous predecessors. Charles was a scholar, a strategist, and a master of administration. He understood that the old ways of warfare were no longer sufficient. He focused on rebuilding the royal treasury, reorganizing the army, and fortifying towns and castles. He avoided pitched battles, instead employing a strategy of attrition, harassing English forces and slowly reclaiming lost territories. His reign saw a remarkable turnaround in France's fortunes, a testament to his quiet determination and intellectual prowess. He understood the value of patience and prudence over reckless valor, a lesson hard-won from the bitter defeats of his father and grandfather. Yet even Charles the Wise could not fully extinguish the embers of conflict. The underlying tensions, the competing claims, and the deep-seated animosity between the two kingdoms remained. The war continued to ebb and flow, a relentless tide of raids, sieges, and skirmishes. The impact on the French populace was immense. The constant warfare, coupled with the devastating arrival of the Black Death in the mid-14th century, led to a significant decline in population and a profound disruption of economic and social life. Villages were abandoned, fields lay fallow, and trade routes became dangerous. The once thriving cultural centres of France felt the chill of prolonged conflict. The internal dynamics of the Valois court also played a crucial role in the unfolding drama. The later Valois kings, such as Charles VI, who suffered from periods of severe mental illness, created power vacuums that ambitious nobles were quick to exploit. The Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War, a brutal internecine conflict between two powerful factions of the French nobility, further weakened the kingdom and allowed the English, under the brilliant military leadership of Henry V, to renew their claims with devastating effect. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415, another iconic English victory, mirrored the earlier triumphs of Crécy and Poitiers, once again showcasing the deadly effectiveness of the English longbow and the vulnerability of the French heavy cavalry. The Treaty of Troyes in 1420, born out of French desperation and English military dominance, was a moment of profound humiliation for France. It disinherited the Dauphin Charles, the rightful heir to the French throne, and declared Henry V of England to be the regent and heir to the French crown upon the death of Charles VI. For a brief, terrifying period, it seemed as though the dream of a unified Anglo-French monarchy might become a reality. The Capetian legacy, the very notion of a distinct French kingdom, appeared to hang by a thread. But history, as it often does, held an unexpected turn. From the small village of Domremy, a young peasant girl named Joan of Arc emerged. Claiming divine guidance, her story, a blend of fervent faith and extraordinary courage, is one of the most remarkable in all of French history. She inspired the demoralized French forces, convinced the Dauphin Charles to be crowned king at Reims, and led them to a crucial victory at the Siege of Orleans in 1429. Her appearance marked a turning point in the war, injecting a new spirit of national identity and religious fervour into the French cause. The Valois monarchy, once seemingly on the brink of collapse, found renewed strength and purpose. The tide began to turn, slowly but inexorably. The English, exhausted by the prolonged conflict and facing internal challenges, gradually lost ground. The French, galvanized by figures like Joan and a growing sense of national unity, adopted new military tactics and strategies, learning from their past defeats. The introduction of gunpowder artillery, though still rudimentary, began to shift the balance of power on the battlefield, making traditional castle defences less impregnable. By the mid-15th century, the English hold on French territory had dwindled to a small enclave around Calais. The Battle of Castillon in 1453, a decisive French victory that saw the effective use of artillery, is often considered the final battle of the 100 Years' War. Though no formal peace treaty was ever signed, the fighting simply ceased. The English had been expelled from virtually all of France, and the Valois dynasty had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more centralized, and with a more clearly defined sense of French national identity. The 100 Years' War, born from the succession crisis of the Capetian line, had fundamentally transformed France. It had forged a stronger sense of national consciousness, uniting disparate regions under the banner of the French crown. The power of the monarchy, though challenged by powerful nobles during the war, ultimately emerged more absolute, having demonstrated its ability to defend the kingdom and restore order. The old feudal structures, while not entirely gone, had been significantly weakened. The war had also spurred innovations in military technology and organization, laying the groundwork for the professional armies of the future. The Capetian legacy, though the direct line had ended, continued to resonate through the Valois kings. They inherited the vast administrative machinery, the legal frameworks, and the cultural foundations laid by their Capetian predecessors. They built upon these foundations, adapting them to the new realities of a post-war Europe. The Louvre, once a Capetian fortress, continued to evolve into a royal palace, a symbol of the enduring power of the French monarchy. The University of Paris, a Capetian creation, remained a vibrant center of learning, attracting scholars from across Europe. The transition from Capetian to Valois was not merely a change of ruling families. It was a crucible in which the modern French nation began to truly take shape. The long, arduous struggle against England, the internal turmoil, and the emergence of figures like Joan of Arc all contributed to a deepening sense of shared identity and purpose. The gentle, almost serene, passing of the Capetian direct line had, paradoxically, unleashed a century of brutal conflict. But from that conflict, a stronger, more unified, and more distinctly French kingdom emerged, ready to face the challenges of the Renaissance and beyond. The whispers of the past, the echoes of Capetian kings who had built the very foundations of France, continued to guide the Valois as they navigated this new and often turbulent era. The tapestry of Capetian rule, though woven with threads of direct succession for over 3 centuries, did not unravel entirely with the passing of Charles IV. Instead, its intricate patterns continued to shape the very fabric of France, even as the direct line faded into the annals of history. The Capetian legacy, far from being confined to the reigns of its immediate kings, echoed through the cadet branches that inherited its institutional innovations, its symbolic power, and its profound influence on the emerging French identity. The Valois, who ascended to the throne in 1328, were themselves Capetians, descended from Hugh Capet through Robert, Count of Clermont, a younger son of Louis IX. This continuity, though marked by a shift in dynastic name, ensured that the administrative structures, legal frameworks, and even the ceremonial aspects of monarchy that had been meticulously built by the earlier Capetians remained largely intact. The concept of the Rex Francorum, the King of the Franks, had slowly but inexorably transformed into Rex Franciae, the King of France, under the Capetians. This subtle linguistic shift represented a profound evolution in political thought, moving from a personal allegiance to a tribal leader to a more abstract and territorial understanding of kingship. It was a journey from a collection of disparate feudal holdings to a nascent nation-state, a process that the Capetians had initiated and tirelessly pursued. Their emphasis on primogeniture, their development of a centralized bureaucracy, and their consistent efforts to expand the royal domain had laid the groundwork for a unified kingdom. The Valois inherited this vision and continued to build upon it, even as they faced new and formidable challenges, most notably the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War, a protracted and devastating conflict spanning over a century, roughly 1337 to 1453, was in many ways a direct consequence of the Capetian legacy, particularly the intricate web of feudal obligations and dynastic claims. Edward III of England, a grandson of the Capetian king Philip IV through his daughter Isabella, asserted his claim to the French throne following Charles IV's death. This dispute over succession, deeply rooted in Capetian lineage and the Salic law that had been invoked to prevent female inheritance, ignited a conflict that would profoundly shape both French and English national identities. While the war brought immense suffering and destruction, it also inadvertently strengthened the French monarchy in the long run. The need for a unified defense against a common enemy fostered a sense of national cohesion that transcended regional loyalties. Kings like Charles VII, often depicted as weak in the early stages of his reign, ultimately emerged stronger, having rallied his people and expelled the English. The Capetian ideal of a strong, centralized monarchy, though tested, ultimately prevailed. Beyond the immediate political landscape, the Capetian era left an indelible mark on French culture and society. The flourishing of Gothic architecture, for instance, reached its zenith under Capetian patronage. The construction of magnificent cathedrals like Notre Dame de Paris, begun in 1163 during the reign of Louis VII, and Chartres Cathedral, largely rebuilt after a fire in 1194 during Philip II Augustus's reign, were not merely acts of religious devotion. They were also powerful symbols of royal authority and the growing wealth and prestige of the French kingdom. These soaring structures, with their intricate stained glass and elaborate sculptures, became focal points of community life and enduring testaments to the artistic and engineering prowess of the age. They embodied a spiritual aspiration that intertwined seamlessly with the earthly power of the monarchy. The University of Paris, founded around 1150, also blossomed under Capetian support, becoming one of Europe's foremost centers of learning. Scholars from across the continent flocked to its halls, engaging in theological debates, philosophical inquiries, and the study of law and medicine. This intellectual ferment, encouraged by kings like Louis IX, fostered a vibrant intellectual culture that would continue to influence European thought for centuries. The Capetian kings understood the importance of education and intellectual discourse, recognizing its role in shaping a more sophisticated and capable administration. The development of a common legal system based on Roman law and local customs was another significant Capetian achievement, providing a foundation for future legal reforms and contributing to the gradual erosion of purely feudal justice. One of the more subtle yet profound legacies of the Capetians was their contribution to the French language. While Latin remained the language of scholarship and the church, the Capetian court increasingly used the vernacular, particularly the langue d'oil spoken in the north. The royal chancery, in its official documents and decrees, helped standardize and disseminate a more uniform French, contributing to its eventual dominance over regional dialects. The Chanson de Roland, an epic poem dating from the late 11th century, though perhaps predating the full impact of Capetian linguistic influence, nonetheless showcases the early development of Old French and its emergence as a literary language. The Capetian era saw the gradual shift from a fragmented linguistic landscape to a more unified linguistic identity, a process that paralleled the political unification of the kingdom. Historians still debate the precise extent to which the Capetian kings consciously pursued a grand strategy of state-building versus simply reacting to immediate circumstances. Some scholars argue for a more opportunistic approach, where each king, driven by a desire to secure his dynasty and expand his personal power, inadvertently contributed to the larger project of national consolidation. Others contend that there was a more deliberate and long-term vision, particularly from figures like Philip II Augustus and Louis IX, who understood the potential for a unified French kingdom and worked systematically towards its realization. Regardless of the exact balance between intention and circumstance, the cumulative effect of their reigns was undeniably transformative. The meticulous record-keeping, the establishment of a royal treasury, and the creation of a standing army, however rudimentary at first, all pointed towards a growing sophistication in governance that transcended the purely personal rule of earlier feudal lords. The Capetian legacy also extended beyond the borders of France, influencing European political thought and monarchical practices. Their successful implementation of primogeniture, which largely avoided the destructive internecine conflicts over succession that plagued other European monarchies, became a model for stability. The Capetian kings' ability to gradually assert their authority over powerful feudal magnates provided a blueprint for other emerging nation-states seeking to centralize power. Even the ceremonial aspects of French monarchy developed under the Capetians, such as the coronation at Reims and the anointing with holy oil, became powerful symbols of divine right and royal legitimacy that were emulated by other European courts. The concept of the king's peace, a Capetian innovation, aimed to establish a royal monopoly on justice and violence, gradually curbing the private warfare that had characterized the early feudal period. While never perfectly achieved, it represented a significant step towards a more orderly and secure society. Louis IX, in particular, was renowned for his dedication to justice, often sitting under an oak tree at Vincennes to hear the grievances of his subjects directly. This image, perhaps somewhat romanticized, nonetheless speaks to a deeper truth about the Capetian commitment to establishing a more equitable and accessible system of justice, a cornerstone of any stable state. The Établissement de Saint-Louis, a collection of legal ordinances attributed to Louis IX, further codified legal practices and contributed to the development of a more uniform legal framework across the royal domain. Even the obscure details of Capetian administration reveal their lasting impact. The Parlement de Paris, initially a royal court of justice that evolved from the King's Council, became a powerful judicial and political institution under the later Capetians. By the 13th century, it was a distinct body, separate from the immediate royal household, with its own procedures and officials. This institutionalization of royal justice, moving beyond the personal whim of the monarch, was a crucial step in the development of a modern state. Its records, meticulously kept, provide invaluable insights into medieval French society and the evolving legal landscape. The very structure of French bureaucracy, with its specialized departments and professional administrators, can trace its origins back to the innovations of the Capetian kings. The Capetian dynasty, through its direct line and its cadet branches, bequeathed to France a powerful and enduring legacy, a centralized monarchy, a unified national identity, a rich cultural heritage, and the foundations of a modern state. The subtle whisper of their influence can still be heard in the grand cathedrals, the legal codes, and even the language of France today. Their story is not merely a chronicle of kings, but a profound narrative of transformation, demonstrating how a relatively weak feudal family, through astute political maneuvering, strategic marriages, and a relentless pursuit of royal authority, could lay the groundwork for one of Europe's most enduring and influential nations. The direct line may have ended, but the Capetian spirit, woven into the very fabric of France, continued to shape its destiny for centuries to come. The Valois, and later the Bourbons, though bearing different names, were all inheritors of this profound Capetian legacy, continuing the work of consolidating power, expanding the royal domain, and forging a unified French identity. A long arc of French history, from the fragmented feudal landscape of the 10th century to the powerful nation-state of the early modern era, is inextricably linked to the patient, persistent, and ultimately transformative reign of the Capetians.